First item on the agenda today is an update on the child tax credits with Secretary Mark Burgart, Kansas Department of Revenue. Mark, welcome committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Mark Burkhart, Secretary of Revenue. There were several credits identified for the department to come before the committee and update you on those. And you should have a very short memo that details those particular credits. The first one is the Child Daycare Assistance Credit. And this particular credit's been on the books since 1989. It was a recommendation of the Governor's Commission on Children and Families at that time. And actually, I guess 36 years now on the books. The credit was put in place to incentivize employers to provide child daycare services for their employees. And under the credit, and there are several different categories of expenditures that qualify and different limitations on the types of expenditures made. But generally, under the bill, if a employer establishes a facility for daycare services, they can deduct 50% of that cost in the first year, and then for subsequent years, they can deduct 30% of that cost. And they can also sort of aggregate with other employers, and they would all get those credits. So that's one situation where credits are allowed. And then other credits that are allowed would be for just paying for daycare services for your employees. They would get a 30% credit on that. So some of the limitations, if you're establishing a facility, there's a $45,000 cap on the credit amount. And if you're just paying for services, there's a $30,000 cap on those expenditures. So generally, those are the types of expenditures that would qualify. The legislature did come in a couple of years subsequent to its original enactment and also authorized credits for if you were to contract with a service provider to find daycare services for your employees, that also would qualify for the credit. So again, it's been on the books for some time. There is a $3 million annual cap for these credits. In my written testimony, I make reference to a fiscal note. Well, I can't really give you a fiscal note simply because the usage of this credit for the particular tax types involved, and we're talking about an individual taxpayer, corporate taxpayer, and privileged taxpayer, banks and savings and loans. If you break down those categories, there's less than 5 taxpayers in each of those categories over the last 5 years. And confidentiality requirements set in law basically prevent us from disclosing the particulars if you're 5 or less in any category. What I can tell you, if we aggregate all of those for those 3 types of taxpayers, over the last 5 years, we've had roughly 15 taxpayers that filed for this, and the cost was roughly $300,000. So not extensively utilized. So that's the first credit. I'd stand for questions on that particular credit at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mark. So maybe folks don't know about this. I didn't know about it till you just start talking. Do you advertise it anywhere, or how do they find out about it?
Well, I'm not sure any special effort is made to advertise this particular credit, but it's in with all of our credits that are available on our website. And I think you're right. I think in large part, there aren't too many businesses that even know about this.
So I'm not sure if this would qualify, but like I know one of my county hospitals put in a daycare. Would they qualify for a credit, or would they even need a credit?
Uh, If it's a tax-paying entity, and it's a taxpayer that's a tax-paying entity, they ostensibly would qualify for the credit.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your presentation. So you got these tax credits in this year. Can they take and go back on back years if they paid money back there and do an adjustment, or can you go forward? That's kind of a one-on-one question, but I was wondering how that works.
I suppose there's no restriction if a business actually set up a child care facility and they spent the required money to do that, and they didn't know about this, and a couple years went by, and they realized that this credit existed. Since the statute of limitations is still open for that year in which they established the facility, which is 3 years, they could file an amended return and claim the credit.
Senator Petty.
Mark, thank you for being here. You know, one of the things that I've heard is that, and I will say that I live in Wyandotte County, and my community has tried to work to put out this information about this tax credit. But one of the things that we have heard is that it's complicated. And so it makes employers not as interested because they see that there are other avenues they could go down. Have you heard that same thing?
Have not heard anything specific in terms of that, but that, quite frankly, oftentimes follows along with any special credit. There are just special rules that have to be followed, and sometimes the instructions and just the schedules themselves can become complicated.
And just as a follow-up, Mr. Chairman, is there anything that you might think of that would help to make this more appealing and easier for an employer to work with?
Well, I think first off, just getting the word out on the credit would be beneficial. And I don't know, you know, when this was passed 36 years ago, the level of communication with the general public, it was more difficult. It's not so much anymore. You know, maybe the department needs to do something to make this more visible to the taxpaying public. And in terms of the complexity, we can certainly go back and re-examine the forms and the instructions to see if any simplification can occur there.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none?
Then the second credit is the credit for household and dependent care expenses. And this particular credit is keyed back to the federal credit. And as most of you know, when you have children, dependents, and you're paying for child care expenses, whether single or married, at the federal level, you get to deduct those expenses. Now, how much you get to deduct is largely dependent upon your adjusted gross income bracket. And at the federal level, at the stage of determining how much is deductible, there is a sliding scale, and depending upon how much your adjusted gross income is, you can deduct from 20% up to 35% of those expenses annually. Now, there is a cap at the federal level, 3 $1,000 for each child or $6,000 for 2 children or more. But that's all at the federal level. Why is that important? Because once that amount is determined at the Kansas level, taxpayers can deduct, or I'm sorry, can claim the credit of 50% of what the federal credit is. Now, I'll tell you that that particular provision, the 50% amount, was one of the amendments that was included in Senate Bill 1 during the special session. So up to that point in time, 25%, so for tax years up to the current tax year 2024, up to that point in time, Kansas taxpayers who qualified could claim a credit for 25% of what they claimed at the federal level. Again, that was bumped up. So when taxpayers start filing their tax returns in January, reflecting their income and expenses for 2024, that will be the first time that we get to see the impact of the increase to 50% from the 25% for this credit. At the bottom of the second page of my written testimony, you'll see a fiscal impact statement that kind of lays things out over a period of years. And you can see that in 2023, and this was at the 25% level, $7,541,000 was the fiscal impact to the state of Kansas, and that was associated with 49,656. So what you might anticipate for tax year 2024 is a doubling of that, since the credit amount went from 25% to 50%. So we're looking somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 million, or an incremental cost associated with that bump in percentage of roughly $7 million or a little more. So that sort of summarizes my written testimony. And again, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for questions on the second credit.
Thank you, Mark. Questions? Oh, Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, you may have an immediate answer, you may not. I don't know. I'll ask, and then if you don't have an answer, you can get the information for us. On the back page, you gave us the fiscal impact. Curious, and if you said something about it, I apologize, because I was kind of reading ahead in some testimony. Tax year 2021, it's 22 million plus, and it's the lowest number of returns of the 5 years you have.
There is a good explanation for that spike for that year. That was during the pandemic. And at the federal level, instead of having the credit limitations at $3,000 per individual child or $6,000 for 2 and more, those amounts were bumped to $6,000 for an individual child and $16,000 for 2 or more. So the federal credit jumped up, it jumped up. We took 25% of that, and that's why you have that spike for that year. But it was only the statutory enhancement was only available for that 1 year. It dropped back down, and that's why the numbers after 2021 also dropped.
Well, that looks to me that maybe we're still not even close to where we should be if that 1 year, because the feds bumped it up and we tied to the feds, that possibly, Mr. Chairman, if we're going to be giving credit for child care expenses, we can see how much it can be for that 1 year compared to what it is when when the federal government doesn't allow as much. So if we can't exceed the federal government allowance, Mr. Secretary, is that correct?
The legislature is free to set whatever parameters it wants on the program, but at this point in time, it is key to what the federal credit is.
That was my question. We are tied currently to the feds, but we could change that. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm set back a little bit on the fewer than 5 individual income tax. Has there ever been any discussion of just dropping that? To me, that's not being very effective for a few. I just wondered if you had any history to where that was at, and it just always sat there and been there, so.
I'm not aware of any recent commentary regarding its effectiveness or its worthiness. I am somewhat familiar with this over the years. In fact, actually 36 years and 1 day ago, I was standing in front of the House Committee on Taxation asking them to pass this legislation. So I've kind of got a history with it, watching it go forward. But again, it just, I think, again, some of this is just taxpayer education and being informed that this is available to them.
Senator Fagg.
So if you have that kind of history, has this dropped off or is it maintained and it's just been this kind of sleeping dog out there?
My recollection is it's pretty much in this way, not heavily utilized.
Other questions? Seeing none. Mark, thank you for being here today. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Next, we'll have an update on the child care funding with Melissa Rucker, Executive Director of the Children's Cabinet. Melissa, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is my pleasure to be here to address the Senate Ways and Means Committee on the work that the Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund engages in for children birth to 5, a population of Kansans, beautifully illustrated by your special assistant today in committee. The Children's Cabinet was created in state statute by the legislature in 1999 as a response to the Kansas joining the master tobacco settlement. So the decisions that were made at that time were really anchored on the use of the annuity that the state receives from the tobacco settlement itself. Kansas was the first state in the country to create a children's trust fund. We did that in 1980. So that trust fund in the 1999 legislation was converted to the Kansas Endowment for Youth as the vehicle to receive the annuity from the settlement each year. And then the legislation created the Children's Initiative Fund, which is the budget that the key fund transfer supports. And I would note that Kansas is the first state in the country that created a children's cabinet. And now I think most states have some form of both trust fund and cabinet. So we were a pioneer in our focus on the well-being of children and families in this regard. And we have operated since inception in a really, I think, focused manner, balanced approach to the use of these funds. Statute requires the cabinet to engage in an evaluation of the use of the CIF funds on an annual basis. So our governing board receives reporting throughout the year. We do an annual report. We do an accountability report. Recipients of the CIF funding in the grant program that our board oversees participate in what we call the Common Measures Initiative, which is a method of providing context to the evaluation approach and allows us to really demonstrate whether or not the investments are having the intended effect. And we have been recognized over time through a variety of different audit processes for the standards that we set, and there have been audits pointing other agencies to our approach to grant making as the 2015 or 16 efficiency audit that the legislature engaged in pointed out we were the gold standard for the process we use. So we are proud of the approach we take and the things that we can demonstrate over time based on the evaluation that we do. We really focus, the approach we take to guiding the decision-making is to follow the blueprint for early childhood, which focuses on 3 pillars: the healthy development, strong families, and early learning. Our universe of programs and services is a mixed delivery system in that programs are both public and private. They're community-based. They can be for-profit or nonprofit. They are faith-based. They are, it's just the gamut of organizations. We do not have a one-size-fits-all approach. When we talk about childcare in particular, it's important to take a step back and understand that the overwhelming body of research tells us that the first few years of life are the most critical for brain development. There are 1 million neural connections being formed in a baby's brain in the first 3 years of life. So every experience a child has, any engagement with the world around them, has an impact on the type of connections being formed and the brain architecture that is created. This can be for better or for worse. So we are always looking for ways to make sure that our children are safe and well cared for and loved and exposed to high quality interactions with the world that they inhabit, whatever the setting that may be. We know that high-quality childcare is a critical component of a healthy economy, because if parents don't have reliable childcare plans in place, they cannot report to work. And we know that because of the child development happening for those children, it's a 2-generation issue for the workforce of today and the workforce of tomorrow. So when employees struggle to access childcare, employers can experience challenges hiring, challenges retaining people, reduced productivity due to the distraction of having kids who need care that fell through that day or whatever. Absenteeism becomes a problem, and employers just deal with high turnover rates and burnout and things. So it takes all of us. We have enjoyed participation in our work, particularly through the pandemic and beyond. The business community is at the table. So it's interesting to me to hear the metrics from Department of Revenue and to think about some of the things we have heard about that tax credit. I think the idea that it is confusing to know what qualifies and what doesn't is real. I participated in terms of how we've communicated. I personally have given webinars and presentations on it. Most recently in November, a joint effort between Kansas Chamber of Commerce and the SHRM, the HR Manager Association, held a webinar, and they had both a CPA who could walk through how that tax credit can be claimed, and myself to talk about the type of things that might matter. And I would say we see far more participation from business in the issue of how to create greater access to childcare than those numbers would lead you to believe. So we have a group of employers out there who are doing the things we would hope they would be doing to help support their workforce on this issue. I don't know why it's not translating into claiming that credit. So I digress for a moment on that. I would say the Kansas approach to the work is to recognize that we cannot impose state-level mandates that work in every community. There are differences all across the state, whether it's in the urban core or a frontier rural community with sparse population and everything in between. We need communities to lead the way and help us solve for the issues that are relevant to their local community. And so the approach to the work has been community-led and community-driven. So I want to first talk about a project. It's a special project. It's known as the Child Care Capacity Accelerator. This was fueled with funding from 4 different sources. We had $20 million from the SPARK funding from the American Rescue Plan allocated for the purpose of allowing us to give grants to construct buildings or do major renovation of buildings that could house childcare. So this is communities looking to update an existing building that's sitting vacant and turn it into a child care center or a local it's all types of licensed capacity that was eligible for this. We also created greenfield construction, or we didn't create it, but we funded with that $20 million. We had $31 million in American Rescue Plan from DCF, transferred from their Child Care Development Block Grant, ARPA discretionary fund, $31 million to match in to help with the major startup operations and costs associated with getting a program off the ground and helping programs operate. We had a $2.5 million gift from the Patterson Family Foundation to bring some private sector funding into the mix. They saw the incredible demand expressed in the number of applications we had, and they wanted to help in rural communities in Kansas. And then we had $1 million that we could direct from a federal grant fund called the Preschool Development Grant to help us pilot initiatives and see if we could help discern what works and what doesn't. So we had 63 total communities awarded funding, 96 facilities affected by that funding. Total of $54.4 million, and we have had the first full year this fall. We were able to report that to date we've opened 3,340 new childcare slots in the state, and that number includes 1,368 that are specifically infant slots, which is a high priority. It's a tough category of care to access. 28 new childcare facilities are now open in 20 counties in Kansas, and it reflects hiring of 448 new childcare providers, the professionals that operate those programs, which is significant because that's part of this multifaceted set of issues. In some communities, it's the physical space that's lacking. In other communities, they've got space. Classrooms are closed because they don't have the providers to man them. So we have been trying to approach this all hands on deck and create a multifaceted approach to things. The innovation communities have borne fruit. We have actually helped scale a couple projects beyond the 1 year that they had to pilot with additional preschool development grant funding that we received this year. But it focused on infant toddler incentive programs to incentivize care, child care models that support non-traditional hours or other types of hard-to-find care, rural child care, public-private partnerships, and workforce recruitment and retention. We also had a different source of pandemic relief funding. It's known as the Capital Projects Fund. This funding was, it's part of an allowance that every state received. It was originally put in the American Rescue Plan as broadband funding, and when the subsequent legislation passed that was providing major broadband funding, U.S. Treasury and at the federal level, they revised the rules regarding the funds. Capital projects expanded from just broadband focus to multi-purpose community facilities that promote, they have to be broadband equipped, and they have to support activities that relate to workforce, education, and healthcare monitoring. So Kansas divided out a portion of our allowance Most of it is going to broadband projects, but there's a piece of it that is funding these capital projects. So we have $38 million awarded to 10 projects in the state to create. We receive permission from U.S. Treasury to also require that childcare be part of these multi-purpose community facilities. So this map that you see on screen is the combination of both the accelerator and the capital projects funds. We did take an approach to grant making that looked at we divided the state into 6 regions because we wanted to make sure that every region received funding. It is more sparse out west, but that's because we had a more limited pool of applicants. So we really did try and spread the money across the state. We are proud of the fact that these projects are helping address childcare deserts in Kansas. Those are communities that had, I think it's more than 10 children in an age group eligible for childcare, and more like 10 per slot. So we are addressing those issues with this funding. We also, last year, the legislature used $5 million of the funding in our key fund, Children's Initiative Fund universe, to provide $5 million for a pilot program. It's the Northwest Kansas Public-Private Partnership. I think you heard from Dangy Hansen over the last year. That is the foundation that is leading this work. Their foundation pledged $5 million as the seed money. Our state $5 million that was provided from CIF funds became a match, a 1-to-1 match for that. They've got the Patterson Family Foundation awarded them $1 million for in 2024, and a pledge to continue to consider additional gifts annually for up to 5 years so that they can make their way towards a match that meets the $5 million amount. And Hansen is actively recruiting other sources of private sector funding. So this would end up, the goal is $25 million total to create an endowment for Northwest Kansas. Deals in the 26 counties that Hansen covers, which they always, I finally learned the way they describe it is if you look at Saline County and go north to the border and west to the border, you catch all the 26 counties in that catchment area. The purpose of this is to help sustain high-quality childcare options for those Northwest Kansas communities. Their grant making their goal is to give 5% of their endowment each year in grants to address emergency financial needs. As they point out, you may have insurance that covers the roof repairs that are needed, but you might not have the funding to cover your deductible costs. So this would be an emergency grant you could apply for. There's other forms of support for childcare to help operators keep their doors open. So we are, like you, we are anxious to hear how this bears fruit. We think it's a model that could be really interesting to consider for other regions of the state. It's in its infancy because the appropriation was just made for the FY25 budget. So we got them all of the paperwork, the agreements, everything that needed to happen for them to set up the endowment at the Northwest Kansas Community Foundation, which was required before we could transfer the funds. We got all that done in summertime, not long after the new state fiscal year started. We have a series of initiatives that really do help focus on rural childcare needs. So I'll go quickly through these. The Small Center Pilot is a KDHE project that is testing some flexibility in the regulations required for center-based care when you have a smaller population. So we're talking about the difference, it's 13 to 24 children, which is a good size fit for a lot of smaller communities. And it helps with staffing, because the small center is piloting mixed stage classrooms and different things that help them maximize the staff that they do have and minimize the overhead that is involved. They've got 3 test sites and it's going well. They're in the process. Is my understanding they've got 2 more in the works, and we're looking at ways to continue seeing this grow. We have a project in partnership with Child Care Aware of Kansas as the facilitator. It's the Communities in Action. These are child care coalitions that are community driven. So the ask is that a community interested in participating bring members of local units of government, local business community, philanthropy, educators, parents, providers. We want a well-rounded group of people reflecting community leaders who they get mentored and coached by Child Care Aware for how oftentimes what we were hearing is, we know we have a problem, we have no idea how to solve it. So this is coaching to help them think about the different aspects of the issue in their community. It's been successful in that we have had 75 different communities participate to date, and many of them translated the work into grant writing for some of the funds that are available, and it just helped them be ready for opportunities, not just the grants we offered, but a variety of opportunities as presented. So we are pleased with that. One of the innovation community pilots that our accelerator tested was a childcare substitute pool. We had a provider who is currently serving 12 communities with the program that she developed to provide qualified substitute care for childcare programs, dealing with staffing shortages, illness, whatever. It can be really hard. Sometimes doors have to close rather than allowing kids in care because you don't have staff. So she's got this program, and we are excited to help scale that with she's a subrecipient written into our preschool development grant renewal to expand to more communities. So we're excited to see that grow. And then Baby Steps is a pilot program Child Care Aware administers that started with gift funding from the Patterson Family Foundation. If you are hearing a theme, that foundation is very, very focused on early childhood. It is a testament to the interests of the Neil and Jeannie Patterson, the original founders of the foundation. Their children are honoring their wishes to focus investments in rural communities across both Kansas and Missouri. And we're grateful for that. So Baby Steps is a pilot that creates a financial incentive to incentivize home-based providers who are licensed and able to take infants into care but choose not to because of what that does to the ratios. It's an incentive to enroll infants. It's fully enrolled. We have 50 providers in 20 counties and 44 providers in 4 counties. There are 108 infants receiving care that otherwise providers weren't planning to take into care. And we are providing preschool development grant funding to expand into 9 additional rural western Kansas counties. So we're seeing good results from that project. So I will also, I need to touch on the Children's Initiative Fund budget because it's an interesting new budget process this year, and I understand that the Senate will take up the budget specifically once the House bill crosses over. But there are some idiosyncrasies that I want to bring to your attention so that it can help guide decision-making. Our Children's Initiative Fund is part of our statutory requirement is that our governing board makes recommendations to the governor and the legislature for the use of the CIF. So our board takes that question up in June So June of '24, well, we were still in FY '24. You had just passed FY '25 budget. We were taking up FY '26 as a board because our structure is such that we have an MOU with the Department of Education. They do not have a role in approving line items in our budget, but they do have to adopt our budget into their budget documents. So they do that in August. June is the closest meeting we have to that August school board meeting. So we adopt our budget recommendations in June. We were using a budget outlook provided by the formal documents, Division of Budget documents, that showed an $11 million ending balance in the key fund. And over the course of the year, Consensus Revenue Estimating Group plays a role in setting the outlook for the tobacco revenues. And they downgraded the outlook, I think, both in April and November this year. With the November adjustments, they reduced the outlook for the revenues down to 41 million. With that assumption built into the budget, we were thinking it was 45 million. It's been a moving target this year, and I will have to say, last week when HB 2007 came out, I was taken by surprise. In November when Craig was meeting and this was all happening, my father was in hospice and I was not focused on this like I normally would be. So the reduction in the outlook affected the bottom line in our budget. So my testimony shows you, there's a table that shows you a comparison. The larger table is the Children's Initiative Fund budget. And what it walks you through is the actuals for FY '24, the approved FY '25 numbers, the numbers that are plugged into House Bill 2007, which is my understanding, they just carried forward exactly what was in the approved FY '25 budget. And then I include the governor's budget recommendation. You can see in the final column on the right, that is the column that reflects the recommendations of our governing board. The board recommended not funding two line items that were funded in the approved FY '25 budget. We are asking that we not approve those line items because of the difference in what happens with our budget. So you can see in the middle column for HB 2007 versus the final column for the CIF recommendations, the difference in the bottom line, it's about $2.4 million. When you look at the next table, the key fund summary, and the governor's budget recommendation basically adopted the cabinet recommendations. So on the key fund summary table, you can see the difference between what happens when you include those line items out of the tobacco funding. We end up with a negative ending balance. And if you follow the recommendations, we don't have a huge cushion, but we do end up in positive territory, which is important. The CIF summary table just helps level set. It is the most favorable outlook we could come up with. There is interest earned on the balance in the key fund. It's part of the pooled money investment program, so we receive the interest, but as we see the declining ending balance in the key fund, obviously there's less interest earned, but we tried to plug that in as a revenue source, and we do receive reappropriations of any unspent funds in the CIF line items because those did not originate as state general fund dollars. So capturing the best case scenario, you can see that we are in trouble. Our budget exceeds the outlook for our only revenue source. We are trying as a board to work out reductions in spending, but we're going to need some help from you all in the form of acknowledging the recommendations our board is making and helping us adopt the budget as recommended would be the ask. So, and then the end section of my testimony is a bit of information about our signature grant program, which is known as the Early Childhood Block Grant Program. So we have grantees across the state that provide services in 63 Kansas counties. There are about 8,000 children receiving services. We focus investments. Part of grant-making criteria for the Early Childhood Block Grant is to focus on children with risk factors so that we're addressing need. And we do a number of different types of programs that help provide parent education and other services. So it takes in about 7,000 parents and caregivers that receive services. These are programs I think many of you would recognize from your own home communities. They're important programs, and we want to protect the work that they do. So I'll stop there. That was quite a lot of information. My contact is up on the screen, and we can revisit any slides if there's something in that presentation you're curious about. But I'll stand for questions, Mr. Chair, if appropriate.
Thank you. Questions? Senator Penny.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Melissa, then when I look at the table, sorry, I didn't have a number on this page, but the key fund summary and then the CIF summary. And so then at the bottom of that page, those two line items that are in HB 2007.
Yes.
The 1.4 million transfer to DCF for the workforce registry and the 1.3 million transfer to KDHE for the child care health and safety grants. So those are items that were not approved by your board.
Correct. Those were added last year in the budget process. And our board is just looking at how we manage the structural imbalance we have. So we have asked that those not be funded using CIF funds.
And then I'm not sure that this is in here, but I think it would help me anyway to particularly show how much the CIF funds draw or help to bring in. But do we have in here a comparison between how much of SGF and CIF and federal dollars help bring in, well, I guess how much of CIF dollars help to bring in private dollars that then support the programs, some of which you talked about today. I know you mentioned the Patterson family, and I know that the item last year with the $5 million, that'll be over 5 years. I was trying to remember when that came up. Was that originally proposed to be SGF dollars that are going to be?
It was. Yes.
And then, so that was just an example of not SGF dollars are being put in, but we're only trying to continue to draw from just this one area. So that is an example of drawing down private dollars. And so is there a way to show that difference there?
Some of that, I think we can. For example, the Child Care Capacity Accelerator, I told you about the sources of funding that we braided together to create the $54.5 million pool. We required community match, and the communities exceeded what the minimum requirement was for matching dollars. So we can document $58 million worth of private sector matching funds or community-driven matching funds to match into our $54.5 million. So we got a lot of bang for the investment that was made in that program. I can tell you that there are line items in the Children's Initiative Fund budget that are pass-through transfers to other state agencies that reflect state required either matching or maintenance of effort. So for example, and I will do the homework to send this committee the official numbers to show that, the X number of dollars is necessary to draw down this amount of federal funding. But I think the example would be the $5,033,679 going to DCF for childcare services. That is part of state required effort to draw down the federal childcare development block grant funding. And it's a significant amount of funding. I think I know the number, but I didn't come prepared to quote it, so I'm going to refrain from talking out of turn. I will provide it, but it's a multiplier effect of many tens of millions that we are eligible to draw down. That funding, it's really important to families to help offset the high cost of childcare services for families. So it's a program that provides a benefit to families to help them pay for childcare costs. There are income eligibility requirements put in place by the federal government. We are in alignment with all of those different forms of guardrails around who is and is not eligible. But that's important funding. It also is money that ends up transferred from, so DCF is the lead agency that receives the federal drawdown. They then transfer funding to KDHE to fund childcare licensing. It's part of that and fee funds from childcare support, childcare licensing in Kansas, and health and safety programs. It's money that supports professional development and different supports for the childcare workforce as well. So it's really important funding for this sector, and it requires state effort. I do believe there's additional funding in the budget that beyond the $5 million that creates the full state effort. I'm not equipped to speak to what those numbers are, but that is one of several in this budget. The Healthy Start Home Visitor funding in our KDHE line item helps the state qualify for a source of federal funding. The infant toddler program, Tiny K, or Part C services, our funding is a significant part of what the state is obligated to put in to maintain the qualified drawdown from the feds. So I can get that to you. The other thing is the pre-K pilot under the Department of Education. That is the Kansas preschool pilot. And I think we are in it's been a couple years since I looked at the numbers, but I think 260 some districts operate preschool programs for 3- and 4-year-olds. This money, this $4.2 million plus $4.1 million that DCF transfers from TANF are the source of funding for that. They can use formula funding if a child has qualifiers, if they are an English language learner, special needs with an IEP. There are categorical aid categories that can be applied to a district-run pre-K program, but they don't. And they're certainly able to work with formulaic funding, but this is the funding dedicated to preschool programming in Kansas. It's delivered as a grant annually. It's a really inefficient way to plan this program. So I'm looking forward to having some conversations about that. And then, really important funding for Kansas parents as teachers, which is something that has over the years been important to the legislature. I know that has grown with support from the legislature. So we see value in the outcomes that children are showing when they receive these services. There are other types of ROI. It's hard when you're talking cost avoidance, but if we have conducted an evaluation. We matched our data set with foster care data. And what the findings show us is there is a reduction in the likelihood of a child being removed from the home into foster care in families receiving our services. And it is 23 to 28% less likely. That translates because there are definable costs to the state for a child in care, in foster care, and it translates to about a $22 million savings. So we're helping stabilize families, keep them together, keep parents and children together, make sure children are safe in that environment. But it's what's best for families most of the time. And so we are helping with that. Upstream prevention is where we focus our efforts. We have a whole agency devoted to the question of child welfare and the services that are provided once a child is, once there's been a report and found to be in need of care. And that's important to have robust services to help children in harm's way. But we can prevent harm. We can prevent crisis from happening, and that is the focus of our programs. There's not a lot of funding from other sources devoted to that primary prevention work, and we really believe in the value of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Couple of questions on the funding. I think we're more interested in that. We appreciate all the other information, but tell me if I'm adding this correctly, but it looks like we had invested originally $54.5 million for 3,300 slots. Is that right?
To date, that is the number that has been that have opened to date, but it should be. We're on track based on the original applications for we've opened 3,340 to date. There's 5,655 that total in the pipeline. So of that, this 3,340 have already opened after the first year of funding. I need us to think of this as a generational investment. This is not just about the number of children in 1 year's time that will receive care. This is about helping start programs that year over year over year over year will care for children. So
I'm wanting to get to the total number. So
Sure.
The 3,340 is open, and you have how many more on that are going to open? You said up to 5,000?
Well, it's the difference between 3,340 and 5,600 or so.
600. Okay, and then it looks like for the 38 million, we got 771
We do.
slots. So is that included in this number? That's separate?
Separate on top of.
Okay, because, and funding, let's just go with the ones that you showed here. You showed 3,340 and the cost was $54 million, plus the private industry put in 58 million. Is that right? Okay, so just taking the 54, of what's open, that I didn't know you had other slots, so, but that's about $16,000 per slot is what we spent on the ones that are open, and now we'll have additional that are included in that 54 million, so that number will come down because of the number of slots. And then when I looked at the capital project funding multi-purpose community facilities, for 38 million, we did 771, which is about $49,000 a spot.
Those buildings do more than childcare. So the two programs are very different.
So we're doing more than childcare in these.
We have and this is a federal program. So
It's a federal program.
We have Hayes Medical Center is one of our grantees. They are building on-site on their ground. They have, it'll be a child care center. It's also a training center. Most of these 10 locations have partnerships with their a technical college or community college, and there will be training and other things.
If you could give us some information on that, that just says,
All,
hey,
all
10
10,
of them, sure. What we're doing, we're just trying to see how many dollars we're spending and what it's costing us and making sure that it's being done correctly.
we have extensive information available. The testimony itself has an appendix that gives you a thumbnail capsule of who the grantees are, how much they were awarded, how many slots each site will have, and a brief description of the program.
Is that the one on the back?
Yeah, so you have the accelerator is the one that you just raised, and then the final page, Appendix C, is the Capital Projects Fund.
So this got the list, okay.
Yes.
I haven't got that far, thank you.
Yep. And then if you would like more robust project descriptions, we certainly can provide.
Just wanting to make sure where the dollars are going and how the applications are and, how do you qualify, whatever. And I think it's great you got all this private money too. I mean, that's
It's been important to see the community embrace the projects. I will say, we have granted all the money there is to grant. We have no more funding to open any additional rounds. In the accelerator, we had requests for $128 million worth of funding. We had 54.5 to give. So there was much more demand across the state than we were able to fund. I think the governor has a line item in her budget, a $10 million line item. It would be SGF funded to open a new round. And I want to make sure to identify none of the existing grantees would qualify to reapply. This would be to add additional capacity. It'll be your discretion whether that is something you choose to fund or not. I do want to say we don't have, you can see it's not something we can move into the CIF column. We don't have the funding to fund it, so with tobacco money. So I just want to make that clear.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Just a couple questions. So along with Senator Billinger's question, what is the demand for childcare slots currently in the state?
So I haven't, again, I am getting reconnected to work as of the first of the year. The last time I checked the supply-demand report, which is available through Child Care Aware of Kansas, it was late October. I was prepping for joint legislative budget testimony, and we had statewide, the number of slots needed was, I wish I had printed it. I think we're taking care of, I think there were 79,000 slots needed, down from 84,000. So
84, so we're down, but so 79,000 additional slots are needed is the demand. So with this model, to Senator Billinger's point, what would it cost to meet that demand if we're spending, just say 10,000 to 16,000 with this model per slot? How much would that cost to fill the demand?
It's important to dig deeper into that report. It tells us, and I don't off the top of my head have these numbers memorized, but there are entries in that report that show you how many licensed slots exist in Kansas, how many enrolled or desired enrollment is the number of slots childcare providers are willing to enroll. And there is a difference. There are 25-ish thousand more slots licensed than currently filled. And there are reasons that differ for every provider why they may be licensed to care for 80 children, but they only want to care for 70 in their program. So it isn't as cut and dried. And that number, the 79,000, is based on the number of age-eligible children. So it's kind of a census-based number. Not all parents choose or need daycare for their children. So it is one way of wrapping our arms around the issue, but it's nuanced. And so I don't think, I wouldn't stand here and say we should fund enough new construction for 79,000 new slots. I don't think that's the answer. I think we do need to support workforce recruitment and retention, which is part of the portfolio of work that we do engage in with our partner agencies and outside partners. It's a tough sector. Wages are low, and it's hard to entice. You have to have a heart for caring for children to want to work in the sector. So,
And then I do have a specific question on the CIF summary.
yep.
And I should know this, I sit on the Children's Cabinet, but for FY '25 approved, expenditures there are up about, what, 8 million?
That,
Can
that-
you help me remember what that was for?
well, the $5 million public-private partnership was added in the legislative process. That was not in the prior year budget. It wasn't something that the board took up as a recommendation, but it got added into our CIF through the budget process. And the two programs that I called out, the $1.1 million transfer to DCF and the $1.3 million transfer to KDHE, were both new items added in the budget process last year. So that accounts for the balloon in the spending, the difference in the CIF budget year over year. So I would like to see us, this may come as a shock to all of you who sit on a budget committee. I'm asking to cut some of the spending in our CIF budget in a very targeted fashion so that we can get back to a more manageable budget number.
Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today. One of the things that I noticed as we go through your list of agencies, schools, and all this that we're talking about was the number of USD districts that receive funding to build new childcare facilities.
So that's a whole different, I'm not that would be a KSDE question.
Well, I guess the question is, it's on your list for childcare capacity accelerator. On the back, we have, I think, 7 or 8 school districts that are receiving funds for that. What are they using those funds for?
I would have to look at each individual award. There were differences in the funding awarded. So we had 20 million that actually funded construction, and then we had 31 million that funded operation expenses. What we try and do is work with, particularly with school districts throughout the grant portfolio. We ask them to plug in their budget, their USD budget funds before our funds serve as gap filler funds. So they can go out with a bond question, they can use capital outlay, they can do physical alterations to existing buildings or build new buildings. So
That's part of my question.
I understand it. So
Because in these communities, were there other childcare facilities that existed that are private?
yes, but most of
Are
the
we competing with public money against the private businesses?
we work very hard to bring the community together. So we have examples where we're building. Southeast Kansas is building a facility. There is a major employer at the table who is donating property. There is a private childcare provider who will operate the program once the building is built. They are partnering with the school district to bring pre-K programming into the preschool classrooms. So that is the approach we try and take. If it's within the context of being on the school district property, we still encourage the community partnership so that we're not doing what you are hoping we're not doing. Like, we don't want to put the private provider out of business.
I'm asking that question because the two that I know of that were built in my Senate district are not listed here, and they're competing against a private daycare facility in their community, and they don't get the advantages, I should say, of public money, public bond money, and so that's my concern as we're using public money to compete against our private businesses.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. When I look at the 2023 Accelerator awarded 54.5 million, and it tells how it breaks it down. And then you got over here, year to date, or 28 new facilities are now operating in 20 Kansas counties. But then down it says when all projects are complete, Accelerator will have a total of 96. So if we're at 23 and we're going to 96, do we have any of them that will fail where you claw the money back? Or I just wondered, you go out and you apply for these grants, and for some reason that they can't put it together, and then the money falls back. Is there any of that happen, or do you envision some of that happening where there'll be some more money available? Just wondered.
I mean, I can't stand here and say it won't happen or it's not possible. And I can think of one example where we did have a provider that, for personal reasons, needed to get out of the business, but we helped make some connections so that there was somebody who came in and purchased the business and kept the doors open. So whenever a situation like that comes to our attention, we try and help coach and connect and convene the community to address those issues. We don't always hear about it, but in terms of these projects, there are some assurances built into the grant award agreements that speak to keeping doors open, you know, the need to operate for a certain amount of time. So that's where that is one that came to our attention, and we helped solve for the situation.
Senator Fagg.
When I look at your map, I see a lot of counties that has nothing. And then you'll see another county that's got 3 or 4, you know, I'm talking outside of Wichita and Kansas City.
Yep.
Do you, when you look at these, is it just because these other counties, did they all apply? Was there a lot of them that didn't apply? Just wondered that spread to this. I was wondering about that.
We divide the state into 6 basic regions, and we considered applications from within each region to create the overall slate of recommendations for funding. So this is driven by population density. So we really are cognizant of the fact that in a less densely populated area, we did not have the number of applicants to choose from. So you might look at a much higher percentage of funded applications in an area that looks like it got very little of the funding.
Any other questions? Senator Petty.
Melissa, I just want to be clear on the Child Care Capacity Accelerator grants. Of that 54.5 million, as I look through there, it looks like only $1 million is actually state money. Because the 20 million was
20
Mark.
20 million was Federal American Rescue Plan. 20 million was also Federal American Rescue Plan from a different area, the Child Care Development Block Grant. 2.5 million private, and 1 million was federal preschool development grant funding that we asked. It's a deviation from our original grant plan, but we sought approval and received it too.
So that 1 million was federal also.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just looking at when we talk about best use of our dollars. So those federal dollars that are flowing through that were flowing through our states to address this number one issue that's coming from employers and from families about childcare
Yes.
best use.
Melissa, did your board or whoever was in charge of deciding who gets these? I look at the map like Senator Fagg, and I look at the map and I think, well, how many of those counties applied that didn't get anything? And you know, it seemed to me like all federal money, state money, whatever, that we would sit down and we'd say, okay, we have $54 million and we've got every county. We've got 109 counties. We've divided that by 109, so each one gets 9,000 per slot versus 16,000 to a chosen few.
One thing I want to clarify about this map, this is, the dots on the map are the actual grantee, but each grantee might have multiple sites that they are helping. So there are more dots, but the map becomes very confusing when you put all of the sites on it. So we tried to clean it up to show you where the lead grant recipient is located. Topeka area, the economic development entity here in Topeka is our grantee. They've got 9 different sites in the region that they are funding. I've got a tri-county, it's Barber County United. There are projects in, I think, Kiowa, I don't remember which of the surrounding counties, but there are more counties. There are 2 other counties. It's tri-county is this collaborative. So it isn't as cut and dried as this map might make it appear.
I know, but I know you said there's still a large need, and we're talking
Sure.
74,000 or whatever. But irregardless, I just wonder if that was considered in your, when you was, yeah, $54 million and you got all these asks to give everybody an equal amount rather than say, no, we're going to choose this one over this one.
Well, I mean, in my heart, I'd give everybody all the funding they need to address the issue. We didn't have applications from a lot of I don't think it's responsible budgeting to just say, here's $1 million, go find a way to spend it. I mean, there.
And that's not what I'm saying. I'm
Okay.
saying only the ones that applied.
Sure.
Let's say you had 500 applied and you funded 200 or 300, say 300. So there's 200 of them didn't get anything. And my question was, did you consider that the other 200 should also get something, that we should spread this evenly?
We considered
facility.
project viability.
Pardon me?
We did take into consideration the viability of a project. So I don't know, I think most applicants got less than they applied, than they asked for. There's a fine line between being able to give them enough money to get the project done when they braid in other sources, and giving them some money, but they don't have a source of funding to fill the gap.
And I understand that, and I appreciate that. I'm just saying that when any of these senators sitting here get asked that, why didn't so-and-so get one when others did? I just wondered. I just wondered if, you know, to me, when you got federal dollars and you got X amount of dollars, it's like, we got this much to spend. We've got this many people that want them. They each get, instead of 16,000, what I figured, maybe they all got 7,000. And they all got more slots. I'm just asking. To me, when you're using federal dollars, I just think that if anybody that applies, we should take care of them. I mean, I'm in a rural community where USDA, you know, if they don't pick and choose which farmers get something. If they have a dollar amount, each one gets a percentage of what they have, and that's why I wondered.
With all due respect, I think childcare, I don't think it's applicable. It's not like roads. We have a transportation program that spreads dollars across every county to do road improvement projects. This is a little different. We have a rigorous review process to score applications for viability. And not everybody had a grant program that was viable. Some were asking for money that they could turn, and to your point, Senator, they might have that other source of money and should be working with their districts, so we wouldn't want to fund that. When you have a request for construction, if we undercut to the point where they can't do anything with the money, these two programs were the only two programs I've encountered in dating back to my election in 2012. It is very hard to access funding for the construction or major renovation of buildings in this sector. Most of the funding provided federally, even our own grant funding, our funding has specific program criteria because we're looking at we are required to evaluate the outcomes. So we restrict people. You can't add a room to your building to add more capacity. We drive it into the programs. Federal funds generally don't allow for construction. So this was a very unique situation. I think it was a one-time situation that is, I don't anticipate seeing it repeated federally.
Well, it seems like across the nation, this issue isn't unique to Kansas.
No.
So I just wanted, so when somebody asks us, we can tell them, say, well, they assessed it, and I mean, that's the answer I wanted. It was, here's how we did it. And
Absolutely. I mean, we had eager applicants. Not everybody had a strong enough application. There was a group that we wish we could have continued down the list and funded, but it wasn't all the way down to the bottom. So not everybody was to a point. They had an idea, but not the details or the construction plan that we needed. So it isn't as cut and dried as it looks on the map. There is effort to support childcare in rural communities. There are a lot of programs I haven't talked about today because they're not in the purview of the cabinet, operated by our partner agencies, DCF, KDHE, through their childcare activities that support individual home-based providers and those types of situations. So there's been a lot of support spread around the state. I have an ask to identify the numbers related to federal drawdown. And there's a question about K-12 districts receiving grants, so I'll get a little more detail to flesh out an answer. If there are other questions that I can provide more detail on, that is my pleasure to dig into.
anyone else have any other questions? Thank you. If you'll get that information, we'll appreciate it. And then thank you for being here, and thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you.